Football Show. I have my son Noah Gilder with me today. Yes, this is his last full day in the U.S. before he heads back to Germany. That'll be one of the topics we talk about later. So we're going to cover 4 different topics, break it up into 4 different segments. First one we wanted to get into is the Berhalter Reyna situation. So I'm going to give a little bit, I guess, of what we know, and then we'll discuss it a little bit. More related, I guess, to how it relates to U.S. youth soccer and hopefully some lessons we can get from that. Again, I don't think anyone who has an interest in football, the real football, has missed this, but Greg Berhalter was the coach for the U.S. for the World Cup. I didn't know this, but he'd been longtime friends with Berhalter Reyna going back to their high school days in New Jersey. I know he doesn't think New Jersey soccer's good, but they actually won a national championship together in 1990. And they both went to the USC Chapel Hill together and played there together. They both met their wives who were playing for UNC Chapel Hill on the women's team. So I was actually in UNC Charlotte at the time that they were at UNC Chapel Hill, not playing soccer, but they were. So they've been longtime friends going back over 30 years. Again, part of that I didn't know, but so I'll just try to stick to the facts we know. Sebastian Berhalter, who is one of Greg's sons, had signed with Austin FC, which is our local MLS team here. Presumably, as Claudio Reyna, who's effectively the general manager of Austin FC, as a favor, and then he didn't really get to play and was moved on to a different MLS club. The rumor would be that Greg was upset with Claudio with not finding a way for him to get playing time. That's rumor. We don't know that, so we're going to stick away from that. Facts we do know is Greg, who we've talked about before he left for Europe, is neither of us are huge fans of him as a coach. I think there's definitely some weaknesses. I think even Greg would admit at this point he handled the whole thing with Gio Reyna, Claudio's son, fairly poorly. Gio shows up for the World Cup. Greg sits down with him and says, "You're going to have a limited role during this World Cup." As a player, how are you going to take that?
You're not going to take it good, especially it's your first World Cup. You're a young kid. It's also like, I wouldn't say it's like his, what's the word you would say? And he thinks he's like guaranteed a spot since he knows it. Greg, he probably grew up knowing Greg, and
absolutely.
stuff like that. And he's the face of U.S. soccer in a way. He's one of the faces of U.S. soccer. He plays for Dortmund. Arne's been a good player at Dortmund. He's kind of made out of glass though. He gets injured quite easily. So it's kind of hard for you, especially you going into the World Cup. Saying that it wasn't even like going into the World Cup. It was at camp he was told this. So he's already made the team. He thinks he's going to get the start, and so then he's at camp a few days away, maybe like a week away from playing in the first World Cup game, and he says he's going to 11-time spot. And you can't really do anything to change the coach's mind when he makes up the choice like that.
Yeah. So Noah's 18, Gio's 19, so he's only a year older than Noah, so it's one of the reasons I wanted to get his perspective on that. And it's kind of the way I say it, it's like, Gio's had some injury issues for sure. As best my understanding, he came into the U.S. camp healthy. I don't think anyone can look at the U.S. talent and say that between him and Pulisic, that's the two big talent players.
You got Weston McKennie, you got Brisbane. There's something else that I didn't like. Was Brendan Aronson didn't play that much. He had the same type of junior. I think Brendan Aronson was on one of the best forms out of the players. Him and Tyler Adams were performing for Leeds, starting already most of the time. And they were in good form, and Greg Berhalter is not playing players in form.
Right. Yeah, and I would agree with that.
And that's the thing that made me the most frustrated.
Right, yeah, we'll cover that, I guess, more in the part about the World Cup and the U.S.'s participation, but I would agree. So he tells, one way or the other, one of our better players, hey, you're going to have a limited role. He's 19 years old, he doesn't take it well. I personally have no issue with him calling his dad or his mom and saying, hey, this is what happened. This is what the coach told me.
It's the parents' response. That's
right. Absolutely. He has every right to it. Noah,
because it's any player needs to talk to their parents, especially a player that's that young, because he's still living on his own, right now. He needs to talk to his parents to discuss about it. But that's not like what his parents do. Is they know that they know Greg. They don't talk to him after the World Cup and do it in a civil manner. And especially as Austin FC GM, he knows how to do it professionally.
Right.
And not to mention the mom doesn't need to get involved at all.
Right.
There's no need.
Right, and that's the thing. I mean, I understand that they're personal friends. Again, I didn't understand that going into this. But so let me wrap up this scenario. So he tells Gio, he rightfully calls his parents, probably talks to some friends as well. Where it starts going wrong is, somewhere around December 11th, and this is another problem with U.S. soccer with such a, it's not inbreeding, but it's almost like that. Is like there's just so many people that know each other. Is both Berhalter and the Reynas are good friends with a lot of the senior members, Ernie Stewart, and other senior members of the U.S. Soccer. So they, the wife has admitted that she called Ernie Stewart, who's, I don't know his exact title with U.S. Soccer, but he's one of the senior executives at U.S. Soccer. It's like, oh, I know something from 30 years ago. Okay. Well, so not only has she stepped over, she should not be addressing anyone at U.S. Soccer, whether they're friends or not, about her son's playing time. Mm-hmm. Period. End of story. Shouldn't be doing that. Let alone bringing up something from 30 years ago. Again, so we get back to make sure we got all the facts out there. In addition to Reyna and Claudia Reyna and Greg Berhalter playing soccer at UNC Chapel Hill, both of their wives played for the women's team, and that's where they met. And like I said, they've been friends for 30 plus years. There was an incident, again, this is out there, I don't need to get into big detail, that Greg Berhalter, when he was first dating his now wife, ended up kicking her. The exact situation was bad enough they broke up, bad enough that also Greg sought counseling afterwards, which he should have. It's something that never should have happened in the beginning, and I think he would say that too, and I think he did in his statement. And they ended up getting back together. His now wife, came back to him, not the other way around. They've been married 25 years. They have 4 kids. They've worked through it, so there's no reason that this scenario should have been brought up. And her excuse was, well, Mike, he got forgiveness where my son isn't getting forgiveness for perceived or not played. So that's kind of the facts. And again, you can look up the Greg Berhalter statement, Daniel Egan, who's Claudia Reyna's wife's statement. There's a pretty safe assumption that Claudia was also making some inappropriate backdoor calls to his friends at U.S. Soccer. None of this should have happened. Yeah. And one that I want to make sure is, at least in my opinion, this isn't Gio's fault. I really find it hard to believe Gio asked his parents to do this. I mean, again, I think he has every right to call his parents and be frustrated, and I think he would be. It would be natural for him to be frustrated.
Anyone else do it, it's not a big deal, but if he does it, it's a big deal. So I don't see the problem with it. Yeah, but also it also comes with the field. His parents should know. His parents should not do this. They should talk to him behind closed doors, whereas the mom shouldn't be getting involved whatsoever. Yeah. Ever. If Gio wants to have a conversation and he wants his dad on the call, well, all right. This is not, or if it's just him and his dad, or even if his mom puts behind closed doors, but you can't go out in public and do this, and you can't go to the third party for this. Or it's a 50-50
They're long, and that's the thing. They're long. 30 plus years that they've been friends. They've traveled together. When Berhalter was a coach in Europe, they came over and visited. He took them around. So these were not strangers. They could have easily just called Greg directly. Again, I think that's wrong. And again, I would look at it this way. As Claudia Reyna's role as, I think, director of operations, pseudo general manager, soccer has a little bit different terminology. Real football has different terminology in the U.S. and in other countries, but he's the guy who picks the players. How would he react if a player that's on Austin FC's parent calls him? I'm not happy with the playing time that Josh Wolf is giving my kid. We need to do something about that. He'd hang up on them, I would assume, or something very close. I appreciate the call. This isn't appropriate. Boom. but yet because they have this relationship with these players that they played in World Cups, Berhalter and Reyna were 2 World Cup teams together. Ernie Stewart overlapped with them. I think it was McBride. It's another one that overlapped with them. Now that they're executives at U.S. Soccer, it's like, but you're taking advantage, and this is where we'll get into it, I think in the last section of kind of things we can do to build up. We've got to get away from this. We've got to find a way.
I mean, it does build it up. It gives drama and people want to look into it, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, we've got more interest in U.S. soccer even outside the World Cup than we have in a while because of this, but it's the thing with this, and that's where having been like a team manager for Noah's teams for years, for lots of different clubs, and watching that and the parents and everything else, and not every parent, but a lot of parents, they think, oh, we're the next Messi. Listen, let me just get this out there. Your kid isn't the next Messi. He's not. There's one of them, okay? He's a once-in-a-lifetime talent. We're not going to see another Messi-level talent probably for a while. Again, Mbappe's great. There's other great players, but the odds of your kid being the next Messi is slim to none.
Why do you want to be the next Messi? Just be the best Noah. Be the best as Harper. Be whatever the best you. Be the best version of yourself. Because there's different positions. There's different ways you play. You might play the same position as Messi, but you play a different way. You might be right-footed. You might be tall. There's so much different factors, and people always focus on one player. Or you can admire that player, you want to play like that player, but you're going to be yourself at the end of the day. Pep says it all the time. No one's like Messi.
Yeah, no one's like Messi. And I mean, a great example of current great strikers, Mbappe from France and Holland, Norway. They're both strikers, but they play very different ways. Partially because Mbappe's quicker and smaller and has to play differently. Holland's big and strong. You're not going to find probably a bigger, stronger striker than him. They play
6'4", Mbappe's 5'10", 5'11".
They play very different styles. Holland shouldn't want to be the next Mbappe. Mbappe because they couldn't switch styles because they're playing to the style that fits their body type. Noah as a goalie he'd be tall in almost any other position, but as a goalie he's not short, but he's
on the shorter side.
He's on the shorter
but
side.
there's plenty of goalkeepers, but you have to make up for it in different attributes.
And like he's saying, he has to be the best version of Noah he can be. That's all he can do.
You can't change your height, but you can change other stuff.
Right. So that's the thing. So back to the Berhalter Reyna thing is, I think the lesson for us is as youth soccer, youth real football parents, we need to start bringing reality into it. I've started seeing there's coaches that are quitting. There's refs. I also ref. He's been a licensed ref for years. He let it expire because he's not going to be in the country long enough to make it worthwhile. But I've seen it with him. He knows more about the real football than pretty much any coach he's run across. And then I've seen coaches get in his face, and in any other situation, I'd laugh. Because I know what his level of knowledge is, and I know just from listening to them their level of knowledge, and they're giving him. Plus, it's an adult picking on a child. At this, he's 18 now, but when the circumstance I'm talking about, you were probably 16 at the time, and they know this, and it's not appropriate. So the coaches. Can be at fault, the parents can be at fault, but it all has to come back to reality is, if we're going to build up refs, if we're going to build up this, we have to do it in a way that strengthens it. But back to this, again, I think the lesson from the Berhalter Reyna situation is
keep it professional.
Keep it professional.
Keep it behind closed doors. There's a reason why it's behind closed doors. There's a reason why they shouldn't be on social media. There's a reason why this wasn't talked about during the World Cup. Just keep it to yourself. There's no need to bring this up. There's a reason these people are professionals, but there's also a reason why there's parents.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to get into a big situation, but he spent a month in Spain, and then he spent 4 months in Germany. And then when he went from Spain to Germany, he happened to get sick. So he spent, when he first got there, it was a little rough, and they couldn't put him behind some of the other players initially because they went right to playing, and he had to recover from being sick. And there were some couple frustrating moments when, as parents, and I think even for himself, he was frustrated with the playing time he was getting and everything else.
Didn't start off well with the coach or anything.
But it wasn't, he's 18 years old now. It's not my place as a parent or my wife's place as a parent to call up, hey, this isn't fair. He, eventually it's got to go, the talent he has is going to show through when it does. And when it does, the coach isn't going to be able to ignore that. And that's exactly what happened. He started, showing that, again, he is definitely the modern goalkeeper who can pass and dribble and, sweeper keeper in the Manuel Noir style of which I guess he's the one who brought it to the forefront. But there aren't a lot of those. And I knew, given time, that it would. And that's exactly what happened. But us getting involved as parents wasn't appropriate. He's 18. He can adjust with the coach. Is there an issue? Is there something I can do? What is it? No. And you hit on that earlier. The problem for Gio is when you're in the camp going into the World Cup and your coach tells you there's no time to fix that.
Yeah.
He's made up his mind for whatever reason. And I get, again, I don't like speculating for something like this. I like to stick to the facts that are out there. But there, where I didn't know about the Berhalter Reyna, connection, I'm sure the players did. I'm sure a lot of other people did, and there's a chance, at least, he was getting some pressure from somewhere. Hey, don't play Reyna just because you're good friends with his dad. Mm-hmm. Now, he shouldn't. I mean, I'm gonna get back to this. He shouldn't play Gio Reyna because he's good friends with that. I think he should play him because his abilities. But the problem became, for whatever reason, he didn't. He said that to Reyna, and again, I don't blame Reyna for being upset, and he's admitted in Gio Reyna's statement that he sulked a little bit. He wasn't as in, but the coach caused that. Greg caused that. Because where you want to plan. I mean, as a coach, you want to plan. Here's some people we're going to be playing against. Who's the best player?
But he should know that before the camp. You shouldn't tell him during the camp.
Yeah, but there's no opportunity.
There's no way you don't know going into the camp that who you want to start and who you don't. It's that, especially a big time player like Gio, you're not going to switch it like that.
Well, and and if there was at least a decent explanation to Reyna that he'd understand if this is why, this is my logic behind it. Now I have a hard time as a football fan of why, because there's opportunities in the. When you look at it over 4 games, even though we made it out of the group stage, in 4 games we only scored 3 goals. This is again back to the Mbappe Haaland, and Pep has said this. This is Haaland's his player. The difference between Mbappe and Haaland is Mbappe can create his own shot. Haaland doesn't usually create his own shot. He creates opportunities by getting open and everything else.
Great special awareness. He's a true striker, but I think Mbappe's a more complete player. If you watch him play, I think Mbappe's definitely a more complete player.
When you look at the U.S. roster, Gio's one of the few, including Pulisic, and Pulisic would probably be the only one even close, that could create his own shot, who could create things for other players. And Pulisic can absolutely do that too. But from the U.S., where Weston McKennie did a great job, and Tyler Adams did a good job, and other things, and their roles are different because of their positions on the field. Gio was one of the few that could, when we needed to score, he could have been more of a difference maker. And again, Greg can only speak for what his logic was behind it. But again, I think. Oh, and then one thing I did forget, I guess, what brought the whole thing with Gio was when he got back from the World Cup. Greg went to a leadership conference, and he thought it was behind closed doors. But again, in today's world, you should know nothing's behind closed doors. And he didn't mention Gio by name, but just the situation he described. Gio had to come out a few days later with his statement because it was so obviously about him. And there's still a little bit of discrepancy. Did the team vote to send him home? Did they not? Which has been denied by Tim Ream, who's the senior member, not the captain, but the senior member of the team. Either way, Gio had to come out and say, look, Coach told me this before. I was upset. Again, I have no issue with Gio being upset. He should be. That's what you kind of want from your players. He should be upset that he doesn't get to play. But again, not really given, when you're doing it at camp, he's got no opportunity. And the thing is, you don't know. I mean, we know that because the U.S. is hosting the next World Cup with Mexico and Canada, we know that the U.S. is going to have a slot, which you don't always know that.
Yeah.
But, and he's young enough that, but you don't, he could be injured, there's all kinds of things that could prevent him from getting to play. So this is his opportunity, I'm healthy, I know I can play, and he's got to know that he's one of the better players, because we've talked about this. I think Noah tends to be fairly humble, but he's talked about it. You can't be a great player or even a very good player without having some ego.
You have to have some ego, because if you're not, you're just going to get ran over. And you kind of learn that quickly when you're playing against people that are actually close to your level. Because if not, that's why when I first started, I was like, oh, everyone's good here, and it's like I didn't believe in myself. But then when you start doing bad, you have to believe in yourself, and when you start playing good, the ego comes with it, because you're just going to get smacked, and that wall, you're just going to get hit in the wall, and when you break through, that's when the ego comes. Don't get me wrong, you don't want like a massive ego thinking you're that guy, you're the only guy, but you also have to have some of that, because you're not going to have the desire or passion anymore.
Right, absolutely. So that'll wrap up our take on the Berhalter Reyna issue, and so we'll move on to